What is an ENFP? These four letters stand for extroverted, intuitive, feeling, and perceiving in the Myers-Briggs personality typing system, which was based on the psychologist Carl Jung's theory of the cognitive functions. An ENFP is someone who prefers to use the cognitive functions extroverted intuition, introverted feeling, extroverted thinking, and introverted sensing, roughly in that order of frequency, and we'll get into what each function does a bit later. But first, you've probably heard that the ENFP is dynamic, creative, unconventional, enthusiastic, a bit scatterbrained but lovable. In reality, any type may possess those characteristics while an actual ENFP might not. Why? Well, because those are personality traits, which are characteristics that can change over time and can be consciously developed. Think of it as the content of personality. The content can change depending on what you put into it, which may include culture, upbringing, personal experiences, and so on. Carl Jung was not focusing on personality traits, but personality types, a classification system that does not change over time. Since it is fixed, it has to offer enough flexibility to account for the variations within, the variation being the diverse content of personality traits. So think of personality type as the structure that is capable of containing a variety of content. Certain structures may tend to lead to certain content, but correlation does not equal causation. So what is this structure? In short, it's your system of information digestion. It's how you tend to perceive, retain, organize, and prioritize information. This is denoted by your cognitive functions. At no point should these cognitive functions be confused with universal biological and executive functions like the five senses and planning for the future. Alright, now let's get into it. The ENFP's strongest function is in E, which is oriented outwards and inhabits the abstract domain. NE is a perceiving function, so it has to do with how the ENFP observes and experiences information. In this case, as an extrovert, they're receptive and attuned to the external world and may spend less time checking in with their internal world. This may come across as a shock to many confirmed ENFPs, since many of them do not fit into the typical extroverted mold. This is because they spend most of their psychological time soaking up all sorts of abstract information and perceiving the familiar in novel ways. In search of more novelty and information, many ENFPs may go out into the world and socialize, but it would be a side effect of NE and not the main goal. Many ENFPs may get much of what they need alone through extensive reading and traveling. Either way, much of the process happens in your head, so to speak, with new ideas piling on top of each other and bursting with disorganization, leading quite a few ENFPs to feel a bit neurotic and anxious, which for some reason are traits that people associate with introverted types. This is why it's famously said that NE dominants are the most introverted of extroverts. Thanks to NE, the ENFP's mind is blessed with an extreme amount of possibilities, tangents, offbeat connections, and randomness. It can be characterized as quick but not necessarily accurate in the traditional sense, as in, when confronted with a problem, the ENFP will easily see so many possible solutions that it's tough to pick only one, and tough just to sift through and see which solutions are realistic and which are fanciful. The plus side of this is fierce creativity and the occasional idea that's so crazy that no one else thought of it but is perfect for the situation. The ENFP's quick mind also makes the surrounding world feel a little slow and yes, boring. Thus, you can often see the ENFP hopping from one project to another, perhaps from one place to another, and never doing things the same way twice. Thus, they're adaptable but may have trouble staying put at one place to reap what they sow. In other words, they may start a lot of projects but have trouble finishing them. Let's also talk about what the ENFP is not. They value different, expansive ways of looking at things and do not like it when forced to narrow or focus their perspective. This means that they do not like to be reined in by one idea, one path, or one meaning. They don't want to commit to any idea, even their own. Instead, they'd much rather be gregarious and free in their ideas and choices, seeing the meaning of life as one thing one day and another thing tomorrow. Though it isn't externally obvious, the ENFP actually can see the true nature of things, such as people's true intentions or patterns of behavior. But their insistence on alternate possibilities and freedom from any rules and patterns tends to obscure that vision. Thus, they are untethered at the core and may seem to have their head in the clouds. Compounding all of this is the ENFP's other extroverted function, TE. TE is a judging function governing how the ENFP structures information. TE structures the external world based on what makes sense in the moment, based on what works, and it does so via external information and empirical logic. TE isn't very strong in the ENFP, so they're not always the best at implementing effective actions and procedures. However, combined with the expansiveness of NE, TE external logical structuring can be a tour de force in the ENFP. Contrary to the La La Land dweller stereotype, ENFPs are often incredibly industrious, with seemingly boundless enthusiasm and energy. They often do quite well for themselves, pushing through multiple projects speedily. This is because whatever their TE shortcomings are, they're often made up by the strength of their NE. If something doesn't work, they'll simply try another idea and another until it does work. However, this often leads to the famous problem of doing things simply because it's new. In that sense, the ENFP's TE abilities are often led by NE in endless directions. Together, through NE and TE, the ENFP interacts with and imposes upon the external world. They create the freeing sense of boundless potential. NE and TE amplify each other nicely as the ENFP hops through each phase of change with competence, and in this way most clearly distinguishes themselves from the more socially extroverted INFPs. Although both the INFP and ENFP might be enthusiastic and energetic when interacting with the people they love, it's easy to distinguish even the shyer ENFPs by tracing the line of change throughout their lives. Most ENFPs will have some area of radical change, whether that's living in different places, having different careers, or even having different life philosophies. Unlike NE, TE is an often visible process since it structures the external world. Thus, the NE ideas of the ENFP will often leave TE traces. Of course, this all contributes to the famously chaotic image of the ENFP. And since their logical judgment is weak in the first place and all of it is oriented outwards, the ENFP can have a difficult time with internal logical consistency. And this problem is actually compounded by strong FI, which I'll explain shortly. FI is the ENFP's first and most active point of contact with their inner world. FI is a judging function, structuring and prioritizing information based on personal feelings, including desires and preferences. This doesn't mean that the ENFP is always doing whatever they feel like doing at any given time. There's some degree of complexity in this internal emotional model, such that there can be a feeling of not wanting to take out the garbage, but also a feeling of relief for taking out the garbage so that you don't have to do it later. Different feelings, desires, and preferences coalesce into the first inklings of consistency in the ENFP, that can rein in their NE and TE activity to an extent. However, as is always the case with FI, it stays consistent with its own feelings and preferences and makes no appeal to any sort of logical consistency. TE might exhibit in one way in one situation with one NE idea, but appear completely different in another situation. Thus, while the ENFP's actions make sense to themselves, they may seem baffling to outside observers. Moreover, the frenetic pace of the external world can be so gripping that the ENFP may often be too busy to use FI without prompting, even though their FI is rather strong. The strength of the ENFP's FI is obvious whenever they're defending something they're passionate about. They also have endearing moments when they express their feelings unfiltered. However, their inner emotional structure is not very comprehensive or anchored unless they tap into SI, which we'll get into later. The ENFP might not consciously pay attention to their FI until they've exhausted themselves looking outward through their NE and TE. When they find themselves making strides but feeling like they aren't really going anywhere, Their inner feelings and values should be the first place to look, though many ENFPs' first instinct is to cover up the problem with more and more TE activity. The ENFP may sometimes be too impatient to sit down and introspect, but when they do, great insights about themselves are often gained. As the ENFP gets more in touch with their FI, it might be a scary process as they recognize all the ways their inner preferences are at odds with the external world in which they primarily inhabit. This leads many ENFPs to soften their expressions to somewhat socially appropriate or expected levels while still staying true to themselves. In this way, they're more conventionally charismatic and socially adept than their INFP counterparts. The thing that's anchoring ENFPs to Earth is their inferior function, SI. SI is a perceiving function that refers back to stored troves of past experiences. It usually has a grounding effect since one reviews what has and hasn't worked in the past in one's own life and others' lives, real and fictional. Although SI is the ENFP's weakest function, it shouldn't be underestimated because the weakness of the inferior function usually creates an insecurity, a preoccupation. Repression leads to fixation. Many ENFPs have a love or hate relationship with SI. On one hand, they detest externally imposed rules and traditions, tried and true ways of doing things, because they're afraid that any adherence to them would limit the freedom of their NE exploration. On the other hand, when life isn't working out so well, they crave the ability to use SI like an expert. Generally, when things don't go right, their lack of SI is the first thing they blame. Many ENFPs have experienced burnout where they neglect their bodies, mess up their routines, and overlook crucial details. If only they could have a bit of routine and familiarity in their lives. But then they wouldn't be ENFP. This is not to say that ENFPs can't learn from the past at all. On the contrary, many are quite good at it, delving into endless details and nuances of the things they're interested in, like history or philosophy. However, outside of isolated scenarios, in the living of day-to-day life, the ENFP will almost always pick the novel over the tried and true. Insecurity often leads to overcompensation. Because of the general chaos of their lives, they're prone to rigidly insisting on a few associations, perhaps hardwired since childhood. An easy example would be the avoidance of certain foods, even if they haven't tried it for years. They can also gravitate to simple and repetitive rituals, perhaps in the realm of hygiene, like washing their hands in a very particular way. Because they have so few sensory associations, these associations tend to be more black and white. For example, associating all comfort to one particular blanket, and if someone throws out the blanket because it has become raggedy, well, watch out that person. Another way the ENFP can misuse SI is by cherry-picking moments of the past as they remember it in order to justify NE activity. For example, focusing on one example of business success amidst thousands of failures in order to justify a venture. Combined with the quickness of their TE, spurred on by NE, they might even come across as being sensorially driven, flitting from place to place and project to project. The ENFP at times resembles a high SE user, but be not fooled, the sensory artifacts created along the way are the side effects and not the goals. Think you might be an ENFP but not sure? Find out your type once and for all through my typing service, available on cognitiveaids.com. We analyze your subconscious visual and auditory cues so you can cut through the stereotypes. To support more videos like this and join me in group chats, please visit my Patreon. Thanks for watching!